a friend, a Masari investor, and the former CTO of Coinbase. He is a serial entrepreneur, one of the leading thinkers in Silicon Valley. And as I said before, we owe him a debt of gratitude for his early, outspoken, and contrarian and right coverage of the coronavirus. So Balaji Srinivasan is going to talk about decentralizing media. Balaji, welcome. Thank you.
Hey.
Take it away.
Can you hear me, Ryan?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
Loud and clear.
All right, awesome. Okay, yeah, so today I'm going to talk about decentralizing media and essentially talk about how we can move from centralized legacy media corporations to where we currently are, social media corporations, also centralized, to decentralized media, essentially a network of personal media corporations. And I'm basically going to describe kind of motivation and then a feature list and then current technologies for implementation that implement pieces of that feature list. And then if you want to learn more, if we launch something on this, please follow me at twitter.com/Balaji. Okay, so just jumping in. So just as an overview, there's this famous saying, freedom of the press belongs to those who have one. And you may like or dislike them, but centralized media corporations are not perfectly aligned with your interests. Okay, that is true for both the New York Times Company and Facebook, for both legacy media corporations and social media corporations. If you're not the publisher of the New York Times or the CEO of Facebook, you're fundamentally not in control of how you appear in those pages, whether in the page of the New York Times, if you're quoted, or whatever you publish to Facebook. And now with the internet, we can actually move beyond this to, what I'm calling decentralized media, essentially a network of loosely cooperating personal media corporations, each of which control their own distribution, monetization, and brand, staffed by citizen journalists equipped with decentralized fact-checking. In a sense, you can almost think this is just blogs 2.0. But with everything we've learned over the last 15 years, particularly how valuable user-generated content can be, everything we can do in terms of decentralized layers, and which doesn't try to reinvent social media or legacy media. It assumes they exist and then builds on top of them. So just in terms of some concepts, I'm going to build through this slide, but basically if we say legacy media, social media, decentralized media, what do I mean by the differences here? So first concept in terms of sovereignty, the New York Times has deploy access at nytimes.com. At Twitter, you have kind of partial access at your username, but at username.com, you have full root access. Second concept, integration. So legacy media just produce content. Social media really just thought of it as pure tech. Zuckerberg used to refer to Facebook as a social utility. Decentralized media combines content and tech. And that is to say, it's opinionated in a way that, Facebook or Twitter or what have you, these legacy platforms, or really, I shouldn't say legacy, but let's say existing scale platforms, really were not set up to be. Fact checking. So legacy media does this at the corporate level, and will usually not fact check itself. It considers whatever it says itself to be true. Social media, until very recently, did no fact checking. Now it's done, arguably an arbitrary kind of fact checking. Decentralized media, everybody's fact checking each other. I'll describe some tools for this later on, but the crucial idea is that truth can't be centralized. By its nature, a truth must be reproducible, independently reproducible. Fourth concept, monetization. Legacy media, simple, you pay them. Social media, it's free to use and, you can distribute through it and they pay you a little. And decentralized media, you own it all. You can make, however much you want, you're in full control. It's your personal media corporation. Fifth concept. So distribution, well, you're basically a letter to the editor and hope legacy media prints it or give a quote to them. Social media, it's much more free. You can post, but you better abide by their terms of service, however they currently interpret them. Decentralized media is fully censorship resistant. The idea is that you own an email list, you own your own domain, you are sovereign from the beginning, not so much because of censorship per se, because it's not that so much that that's going to hit you on a daily basis, but it's more control of distribution. And that's highly related to censorship in the sense that, for example, legacy media and social media are wrestling over, does news appear in the feed? How much does it appear in the feed? And so on and so forth. So censorship is sort of like the political version of it, but distribution is kind of the monetary or corporate version of it. How much do you show up? Sixth concept, setup costs. So legacy media was once high, it's now lower. It used to be you had to buy printing presses and so on. Now it's relatively easy to set up like a new media corporation. Social media was once low, it's now higher because the standards for minimum viable product have risen. Decentralized media would be very low, initially just a domain name, and I think we can take it further. Privacy. So mostly named authors in legacy media, social media, some pseudonymity, legacy media, full pseudonymity. And what I mean by this is social media, there's some folks who go by pseudonyms. With decentralized media, though, you can have a private domain name, you can publish fully pseudonymously, you can take Satoshi level OPSEC should you so choose. Somebody actually did this for their analysis of whether the COVID-19 virus came from a Wuhan lab, and they published this on GitHub, and they did it fully pseudonymously. That's a good example of decentralized media. Alignment. So legacy media, they're aligned with the shareholders and employees of media corporations, just like social media is aligned with the shareholders of tech companies. And for you, if you're setting up your personal media corporation, it's aligned with your shareholders. Programmability. So legacy media, closed API, and scraping, it's really not meant to be programmed against. NY Times, for example, has an API, but it's really not something that you have some access to it, but to build a full company on top of it, you probably wouldn't be that easy. Social media is a much more open API. Lots of people write, programs with, Facebook login or Twitter login, but famously, they've also used their platform in aggressive ways. And decentralized media would be a culture of fully open source and using technologies like DNS, things like GitHub Pages are examples of this. I'll come back to more later. And finally, in terms of the general orientation is how I think folks should approach this. Legacy media is, writing as a job. Social media is writing as a hobby. And decentralized media is, I think of it as writing as a duty as a citizen to get it out there. You may want to make some money. It's like a serious hobby, but the idea would be 1,000 citizen journalists making $100 or 100 citizen journalists making $1,000 versus one corporate journalist making $100,000 a year. You basically decentralize it rather than have one generalist who doesn't really know anything in depth. You have ideally a plumber who's writing, you have a delivery worker who's writing, you have folks from many different professions who all have their own specific expertise. Okay, so that was a desired feature list. Implementation will be discussed at the end. I want to go into a little more depth in each of these features that we discussed. So sovereignty. So as I mentioned, with decentralized media, you own the domain name. With Twitter, you can have your account suspended. You can be, like deprioritized in the feed. You have to pay them for ads. Here, you can just get your own domain name. That's kind of one of the things that I would consider a principle of decentralized media. You own your domain name. Eventually, we'll want ENS, IPFS, stuff like that. Integration. So, one of the concepts I think about when I think about decentralized media is full stack narrative. There's a great site called wistia.com that gives an example of this, which is better shown than told about. But if you Google 110 100 and watch this, it's essentially 3 videos that go beyond content marketing to essentially make wistia.com into something that's developing and shipping its own TV show. So that's different than isolated blog posts. That's different than isolated tweets. That's a coherent story arc. And the idea is that with decentralized media, every company, a media company. If over the last 10 years, every company became a tech company, whether you're in taxis or hotels or what have you, you have to become a tech company. Over the next 10 years, I think every company must become a media company because otherwise they're not going to get their own narrative out there. They're too disaligned with legacy media corporations. And that means not just tweets and podcasts, but TV shows, interviews, memes, the full gamut. You're a media corporation. That's actually a big part of your advertising budget in a sense. So next concept, fact checking. The old school way is something like PolitiFact, or it's relatively new, but the concept is you just trust a single entity. Social media now, Twitter's been rolling this stuff out, like, get the facts about COVID-19, tagging misinformation. But decentralized media, there's a number of different approaches here. And that's a kind of a whole talk in its own right. But there's a great book called The Truth Machine by Michael Casey and Paul Vigna, formerly of the Wall Street Journal, that talks about the fact that Bitcoin is actually decentralized access to truth in the sense of, there's folks who share nothing in common. They're in Japan, they're in Brazil, they're in France, or in the US. They don't share common legal systems. They don't know each other. They don't share a common language, anything like that. But they do all agree on the state of the Bitcoin blockchain. And that's a very important concept of decentralized truth. And it potentially can be extended with things like oracles, for example. So that's something I'm very interested in, is using computer science and explicit references to potentially allow people to fact check in a decentralized way. So you don't just let it be a complete free-for-all with no objective truth, but you start to think, okay, how far can we push decentralized consensus? Maybe it's only within a group, but how big can we make that group? Okay. Monetization. So, Substack's a major part of this. Like basically you start to think of your writing as something that's revenue generating. And it's not even really, for some people, they would try to do this as a profession, of course, and that's fine, more power to them. But, just allowing folks to make, a few hundred or a few $1,000s a year to spread it out more. It may be that not everybody has 50 or 100 essays in them a year. But if you have 2 or 3 based on your own unique experience, if you could get paid for that, that'd be really great. For a lot of people, that'd be, a nice, maybe it's a computer or it's an iPad or something like that. It's the encouragement to get citizens to do something more than it is, like monetization, just for a big corporation. And one way of thinking about this is, a lot of the money has gone out of media. And so a lot of folks in media have to either have trust funds, or they have to have, wealthy spouses, or, mom and dad are paying for their apartment or supporting them. That's kind of like an open secret within legacy media. And, maybe the news trust fund is a full-time job in the sense of you're a chemical engineer. Okay. You're somebody who works in, design or architecture or something like that, and something about a topic area and you write about it, and you're doing it because it's your duty to inform the public. You're not doing it because you're trying to maximize clicks alone. You're doing it because it's your duty. Next concept, distribution. So as I mentioned, Substack is good for monetization. It's also good for distribution. Those go hand in hand, actually. You basically get your own email list. You're not subject to just having followers that you can't directly reach without the consent of Twitter or Facebook. People actually, they often mistake this. They think, oh, what's important at Twitter or Facebook is your data. Actually, it's pretty easy to export your data. The important thing that Twitter or Facebook have is your access to their social graph. That is to say, whatever followers you had, you cannot contact them without the consent of Twitter or Facebook. And that's actually the important part, which getting your own email list gives you. So next concept, setup costs. Again, domain names have become very cheap. And, when we think about this, in a sense, I'm just talking about setting up a blog for each person. But I think we can do way better than the old age of blogs. Now that it's like 15, 20 years later, there's things we can do with DNS that are in between a full index like Google of every site and a full hosting thing like Facebook. If you had a network of sites that all had the same technology, they could have sovereignty with some degree of cooperation. I think there's something there. So privacy, so this basically is, if you want to be Satoshi, if you want to publish something that's really important, the traditional way of doing it is if you're, like Deep Throat going and talking to Woodward and Bernstein, or you're Snowden, you need to go through an existing, legacy media outlet. Now, increasingly, things like the analysis of the Wuhan virus that I mentioned before, that just got posted to social media. But the ultimate is, decentralized media, where and the COVID virus analysis is also another example of this, where you post it to your own site. And now the source can just speak for themselves. They don't need to be mediated. They can say things in their own words. They don't need to trust a reporter to protect their privacy. There's an example a few years ago where there was a source who spoke to The Intercept, and it got leaked somehow, and then that source was jailed. And so it doesn't even need to be that the journalist would mess it up on purpose. It would just be something where you've just got 2 people who can screw up rather than 1 person. So if you want Satoshi level OPSEC, if it's really sensitive and important information, decentralized media, it may be superior there. Alignment. So again, an obvious one. The New York Times is a company. It's a corporation. It's got proxy statements. It's worth reading their financials, just like it's worth reading Facebook's financials. Ultimately, they have a responsibility first and foremost to their employees and shareholders, which is completely reasonable. If you have your own personal media corporation, you're responsible to your shareholders, who can be whoever you want. It can be your friends, it can be your coworkers, it can be your colleagues, it can be other people in your industry. You can slice and dice that cap table if you decide to take outside investment or do whatever you want with it. Programmability. So, I think GitHub Pages and Creative Commons are sort of in the spirit of what I'm thinking here. GitHub Pages, your backend is open source. That is to say, your backend is a Git repository. It's not a CMS in the traditional way. It's something that's on GitHub, and you can export it anytime. And that combined with Creative Commons, well, what if we actually had a new, not media company, but a new media community where all content by default was open source? That would allow for natural language processing. That would allow for scraping, for integration, for named entity recognition, for lots of interesting things. And I think we're really just at the beginning of something where all content would be open source, and you might monetize another aspect of it. And finally, duty. Citizen journalism, if you go and Google it, it is a term. It's in the dictionary. The collection, dissemination, analysis of news and information by the general public, especially by means of the internet. So it's out there. It's an important concept, and I think more and more we're finding that unless you yourself go and participate in the news gathering process, you don't really have the ability to discern what is true and what is not for decisions that could significantly impact your health, like something like COVID-19 or something like civil unrest. So that's writing as duty. So in terms of implementation, these are concepts. This is like a vector for what decentralized media is and could be. Pieces of this have been implemented, but not all of it in kind of one package. So what I mean by pieces, for example, blogs, of course, had independent domain names. They've been around for a long time, 20 plus years. Substack has the email list monetization, very important components. Stripe Atlas has incorporation, YC, seed funding, GitHub Pages, open source content. All existing legacy media is content for critique. All existing social media, you don't have to give it up. Those would be tools that you use to generate content, to distribute, to find influencers for your personal media corporation, which of course you can use to employ others. And then finally, crypto, I think, will be an important component of this, and the one that really hasn't been rolled out yet. Crypto first for payments, simply to pay people in any country or take them through any country, and then eventually, hopefully, for truth in the sense of Vigna and Casey's truth machine. So I know this is a list of technologies. It's something where all the pieces haven't come together yet, but this is directionally how I've been thinking about decentralized media. So thank you very much, and follow me on Twitter or DM me if you have any questions or comments or critiques. Thank you.
Wow. Incredibly insightful, and I think one of the things, Balaji, that you touched on that I felt instinctively for a while, and I'm almost embarrassed that I've not been able to put words to it, given I used to run CoinDesk and now running another information business, but the concept of every company being a media company, much like every company became a tech company.
Yes.
And I guess what do you think the biggest challenge? You laid out a lot of variables to what this could look like. What do you think the biggest 0 to 1 challenges in taking the next step in terms of evolving everybody to citizen journalists and decentralized media? Because there are some structural impediments, I think, that are larger than others, although a lot of them have been eroding over the last few years, and this year at a hyper accelerated pace.
So I actually don't think there's any major structural impediments. I think it's just a function of execution. What I'd like to do to start is basically just get a community of 1, 10, 100 folks who basically just set up their own blogs. The technology stack is important. That's something I've been thinking a lot about. Essentially, the ideal would be I'd want something, just get a little technical, like that has the usability and of something like ghost.org. But that has an open source backend like GitHub Pages. You might decide to just go with GitHub Pages, for now to start. But it's not quite as full featured as Ghost. So that's something, just from a technical standpoint I've been thinking about. But then the idea would be you get, 110, 100, folks setting up blogs. And then something that really hasn't been done is to think about whether you can network between them in a more sophisticated way than simply links. For example, in DNS, you can write TXT records. You can do things with DNS. You can also use other layers, obviously, like blockchain or crypto layers. What I don't think people have really thought about is how to take websites and organize them in any way other than an index. Maybe you can make hierarchies or rings or topologies of websites where each individual proprietor is sovereign, but they decide to cooperate. For example, you could structure them in a hierarchy where there's a top level, index, and then it's got 3 categories underneath for bio and crypto. And then each one is actually pulling from an RSS feed of a bio site, a crypto site, and so on that are dedicated, and it gets kind of mashed up like that. So I think that's kind of an interesting concept, like a topology of websites. Hasn't really been done yet, to my knowledge. So that's kind of something I've been thinking about.
Terrific. Balaji, thank you so much for joining for this presentation. Hope you're able to hang out. I'm sure some people might have questions in the chat, but appreciate you taking the time, and we're excited to see what comes next.
Great. And follow me on Twitter and DM me if you have any questions. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.